All right. Welcome to another episode of Sync B-Sides. The name is finally stuck, and I'm really excited to bring our new guest on, right? So our latest guest is Adrian Tan. So if you know anything about HR, you listen to CNA radio, you read articles online, you probably know Adrian from all of that. So what we're actually going to discuss right now is kind of the different aspects of things. Being an expert, discussing marketing, Adrian's role as a fractional CMO, which is really fascinating. I kind of want to get into that a little bit more. But maybe what we can touch on first is uh, what I noticed is you kind of went very strong into the podcast game almost immediately. Like we just discussed right before we started that we're using the same mic actually, and you've got a really good setup going right there. Could you kind of like delve into that? Like, why did you choose to go into podcasts, or what was kind of attracted you to that medium?
It was really quite accidental, and I think it's just a scratch that I wanted to, or rather, sorry, an itch that I wanted to scratch because this happened around 2016. I was listening a lot to Tim Ferriss, and after a while, I was thinking, hey, maybe I can do something similar. But back then, it was very challenging to do podcast. Uh, I actually have to physically meet someone, and I remember I have this setup, which was basically my iPhone, and I have this external mic that hook up to the iPhone. But you just imagine that boom mic is just singular. So I kept having to swap direction in order to make sure that it captures both party well, which was pretty annoying. And then the post-production, that was also extremely painful. But still, I persisted because I also had a friend who was keen in podcasting, and he helped me with some of the back end stuff and roll out 5 episodes. One of the episodes we happened to record virtually, and it was done through Skype. If everyone still remember what the hell Skype is, so it went out. But I think we were perhaps maybe 3-4 years too early. There wasn't really much engagement. Hosting cost money, even for 5 episodes. So after a while, I called it quit. Fast forward to the start of COVID, because of so many Zoom calls and all, I bought equipment for myself to provide a better Zoom experience, but you don't really have that many meetings every day. So I was thinking, hey, maybe I can put this microphone to some good use. How about I reboot my podcast? And it just became a continuation of what I did before, and it went on from there. And I would say, I guess the key motivation here is really to get to know people and to understand exactly what's going on in their life. Basically, I'm quite an inquisitive person. And having that conversation really helped me to understand more about stuff which I really want to learn. And I guess it perhaps sounds less stocky-ish than, hey, I don't know you, but can I talk to you for a second? But if you were to frame it as, hey, I have a podcast, I want to invite you on. That sounds a bit better. So that's how it all went on. And of course, along the way, monetization came in. I had a friend who was doing something else. He said, hey, could you offer a slot on your podcast as one of my value add in what services he's trying to sell? And he brought in a lot of guests for me as well. So things just went on from there. And I continue to do it even though that has already expired, because I still enjoy having that frequent conversation with people across different spectrum. And that really also helped me in another aspect of my life, which is asking good questions on other setting. Because of the ability to ask good questions during a podcast, it has translated to me able to ask good questions if I'm an MC, a moderator at some events and all. So that's how it just kept going. And of course, it has escalated to I'm doing another podcast for a client. I'm on the Channel NewsAsia podcast as a co-host as well. So I guess it just snowballed from there.
No, that's really fascinating because I think you're one of the few business podcast success stories that I actually know of, like from Singapore and stuff like that. It's not really common, right? Podcast as a medium here, outside of maybe entertainment, isn't that big, and you're one of the few people who's actually doing something really interesting. Before we go on to the next topic, I actually kind of wanted to dive down a little bit more into the monetization aspect because I think that's one of the things that's stopping people from really going deep into it, putting out more great content because the more podcasts that come out there, the kind of I believe people will kind of flock to it because there's going to be really good content out there. Yeah. How do you, so other than your friend, for example, who used to add you as a value added service to some of his work, did you monetize in any other ways? Was there always an option to monetize?
Monetization honestly wasn't top of mind when I first started off. And also I know my own niche is a very small subset. I'm not talking about stuff like romance, travel, things that may appeal to people on the street. And that always mean that my listeners will be a very small pool compared to those other more mainstream topics. And because of that, it's very hard to sell to advertiser. Oh, I have 500 listeners. they don't care about your 500 listeners. But of course, as things continue to grow, I also have established that this is a very specific set of audience that might appeal to some companies out there. For instance, companies that might be in the B2B space. And with that, I managed to bring in, of course, sponsors, bring in primarily on the sponsorship side to do pre-roll, mid-roll, post-roll. It also helped that I host my podcast on Zencaster, the platform that we're using right now, and they occasionally may have some sponsors. They'll match according to your podcast, so that's also helpful. But beyond just a podcast, because I also do writing, I have my newsletter, etc. So that also enabled me to provide the podcast aspect as one of the entire suite, not just podcast per se. Yeah, so if companies, let's say they want to tap on my traffic to reach out to their target audience, I would tell them, okay, I can do a LinkedIn campaign for you. Over and above, I can also do maybe put a banner on my newsletter. I can mention you on my podcast, and this is the set, the entire set that you want to look at.
Got it. So you're basically using your platform as a platform to kind of upsell other aspects of and other things that you do as well. No, that's fascinating because I think, like I mentioned earlier, right? It's really difficult to kind of establish a sustainable way of bringing in revenue or bringing in some sort of sponsorship. When you have a podcast, at least here in I'll say Singapore, I won't even talk about other markets outside of Singapore. I'll say Singapore. Moving on from that, because I think you mentioned, and I didn't even know this actually till you mentioned it to me, that you have a role as a fractional CMO, right? So for those who don't know, maybe I'll explain it and you'll explain it a little bit better after me. But that's someone who takes the role of a CMO, but in a small bit. So it's not a full time role. I wouldn't even call it part time. You're really there to kind of like fill in gaps and solve issues and problems without actually coming on as a full time CMO. Could you share a little bit more about that? Because I mean, I gave a really terrible description right now. Could you kind of elaborate on that?
Actually, you're not wrong. I would say the term fractional is somewhat like a more sophisticated, more professional sounding term, but in essence, it is in a way a part-time-ish kind of engagement. And it's not anything new. In the finance space, it has always been very prevalent. You always have your part-time CFO, you have your CFO as a service, which honestly is the same thing. Then you go into CTO. So there's also a lot of fractional CTO. Right now is CMO. I've heard of companies looking in providing CSO right now, Chief Sales Officer as well. So the premise, of course, since the key thing here is not just to provide execution work that typical marketing agency can do. It's really very much at the strategic level. But it does only appeal to a very small niche set of companies that perhaps are looking to, say, set up an entity here in Singapore, but they are still new. They do not want to just throw every single dollar to hire all full-timer. So on the marketing aspect, they may want to hire someone with experience to assist them and support them on the strategic level, but not on a full-time basis. And that is so far what I'm seeing across the different spectrums of customers that I deal with. There would also be instance, perhaps it could be a stopgap measure. Maybe the marketing person is on, maternity or something, a leave of absence. That is again where the fractional CMO comes in. But usually it is new market penetration, and perhaps in some instance where they may be going through a reorganization, So during that phase, while they figure things out, that again is where the fractional model might be more appealing rather than going straight for a full-timer.
So then in your role, right? So because I think you mentioned, it's really interesting. I was even thinking about that. But if it's new market entrance, right? Have you done any work specifically for that segment of as part of your role as a fractional CMO?
Yes, so I have a mix of clientele base. One of them is going through that reorg kind of mode right now, which is why I'm stepping in, or rather, why I've stepped in to support their marketing initiative to revamp everything from scratch. And another one, which I'll be taking on very soon, happens to be a Canadian company, and they're huge in their own country, but in Singapore, it's a new setup. And so they again require people with that expertise, know-how. But of course, I think the key reason why they also come to me is because my reputation is quite obvious in the HR space, because I've always been very much a HR vendor, from recruitment to outplacement technology, etc. And these are companies that are in the same space as well. They are also selling to the HR department. And that's where they think I can best value add, because I know that segment of audience, I know their pain point, I know what they lose sleep over. And that would really make things or shorten the process from, okay, we are here in Singapore, now what? To eventually getting the first deal into the door.
Got it. Okay. No, that's interesting. That's interesting because I think when you break it down into different segments like that and the roles that you take, being a fractional CMO actually really makes sense. Because if you're going to be solely focused on this thing, which has a relatively short shelf life, because after that the role then pivots into something a little bit more sustainability and growth, right?
You're right.
Versus
You're right.
penetration.
Yeah. So after, I mean, in the longer term, you can anticipate and expect companies who are doing well would eventually want to hire their own full timer, and that is when you move on to another assignment. So it's somewhat like a tour of duty, lah. Yeah.
Okay. One last thing about that before we kind of move into the next topic, which I'm really fascinated about. Are these roles primarily where you take it as a part-time thing, or are you taking in like a chunk of time, like 3 months you're focusing solely on that? Or is it just a part-time in terms
It
of
is a
in
it
terms of
is a
the
mix
time?
of both. So all this comes in assignments basis. So it could be 3 months, 6 months, 1 year retainer kind of thing. But the time commitment will always be on the reduced work week, because that will how it makes sense. Because in a normal scenario, any companies, if they want to hire a full time CMO, you're looking at maybe 18 to 25K per month kind of salary banding. So by reducing the work hours per week, that is how they can also reduce the associated cost. Yeah, so it's a mix of both.
Got it. No, that makes sense. That's fair. Also, the CMO salary seem really good. I need to look at that one day. So this is a topic, right? That's kind of I mentioned it to you before this call, and when I sent you some of the points as well that I want to discuss with you. So when I was on your website, so I've been on your website many times. And I went again recently when you were coming on the podcast. And one of the things that you have is like a bunch of testimonials on your website, all the place, kind of like from dozens, if not even more than that, just people just literally saying like, "I love Adrian," right? One thing that was interesting is I don't see you calling yourself an expert. Or if you have, I don't see it being like, you plastering it everywhere. Like, I'm an HR expert. I'm an expert at this. But what I see a lot of people doing from the testimonials, from things, from the fact that I've worked with you before and other people out there, they call you an HR expert. In your opinion, right? Like, what actually does it take? What does it take to be a real expert in the field? Because everyone calls themselves expert now. Like even people, even I have to call myself expert sometimes, just because and it's selective in conversation. I don't go out to random people say I'm an expert. But like, what does it take to be an expert for you?
Before I answer your question, I actually have quite a long backstory on this. So when I exited from my first recruitment business, I wanted to get into a technology space, and I interviewed at companies like LinkedIn, Hire.com, and I didn't get a job. Sorry. And I decided, okay, I'm still interested in the tech space. How should I pursue this? Maybe I can express it in a different manner. And I started to write about it because I always enjoy writing. So content after content, I arrived at a time where I was thinking, okay, maybe I can put together this HR tech market map. out of interest because I've seen someone from CB Insights did something similar. I was trying to find a Singapore version, Asia version, cannot find. So I put together and things really went viral, and I continued to do it for about 3 more years. And while I still build on all those content, and over time, people naturally just associated me as the go-to expert for HR technology
Oh, by
because
the
I
way,
keep talking
Adrian,
about it.
one thing, thanks for doing that map though, because I used to get all our clients would be like, why aren't we on Adrian's map? I'm just like, God damn it. Always bugging us, they want to be on your map. Thanks for that. A few sleepless nights.
You're
No,
welcome.
but yeah,
So
you're right. Sorry, Karen.
yeah, so that just evolved, and as you know, it will also lead to perhaps media outreach. Maybe someone want to ask me about certain HR tech space. And I also realized one thing, journalists tend to take the easy way out. If they ask you on one thing, they will try to ask the same person on an adjacent matter, even if it's not related to HR tech. So again, I become the go-to guy. And again, this other part may play a small contributing part, but in the Mandarin speaking world, few people can talk about HR.
Okay. No,
Yeah.
that's very interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting.
So English speaking, a lot of options, but Mandarin speaking, very few options. And I started doing that because I needed the publicity when I was running my own business. So even though I struggled a fair bit, but eventually, as with all things lah, if you put enough time into it, you'll become decent lah. So decent enough to appear on Channel 8 and all. And again, talking about HR stuff. So again, it just snowballed from there, lor. And everyone would perceive me as the go-to expert for all HR matters, HR tech matters, and right now we call it future of work lah. Yeah, but personally, I don't really call myself a HR expert because my annotation of HR expert is actually a HR practitioner. Someone who is a HR manager, a HR leader, which I'm not. I constantly have to clarify I'm not. I've never been a practicing HR for a single minute. Yeah, so I sometimes also try to inform the media company, hey, can you don't put me as HR expert or something else? We toyed around with some ideas. I remember in one article, they listed me as HR guru. And the article went on to
I didn't.
Facebook lah. And Facebook, I tell you, a lot of keyboard warrior one. No matter what I write, sure got keyboard warrior one. So one person said, what guru is this about? Guru write this kind of nonsense stuff. And I actually replied to this person. Oh, actually I asked them to write HR Gundu, but they write guru. so they stopped using that. And right now it's just okay lah. I'll just live with HR expert lah. Because honestly, there's no other better elegant way of putting it. HR enthusiast. Ugh, that sounds like a
No,
mouthful.
that's terrible. Actually.
Yeah. So again, I think it's really very much from the content angle. If you keep exposing the same content, similar topic to the general public over and over and over again, people will naturally associate you with what you do. Lor. So somewhat, Google SEO-ish kind of thing. And yeah, I think that is the best way for honestly anyone to consider becoming an expert, which we have seen a lot in the content creation world, from blogging to Instagram influencer to TikToker, etc. It's just something that you have to do, but you have to do it in a consistent manner.
No, that's really interesting, and that's actually a really good insight as well, because I guess what I'm trying to understand from a broader perspective, right? Not particularly about you, is if we're throwing out, it's kind of like throwing out terms a little bit too aggressively, like digital transformation, stuff like that, where it loses its value after a while, because you can't talk about changing a traditional paper system into using a Google Doc or an Excel sheet as what we call full digital transformation. It's now using Excel, right? It's different. I feel like the term expert's kind of gone through that, because if everybody and their uncle is an expert, no one's an expert. And that's always been my struggle, because I'm
if the taxi driver is asking you to buy crypto, don't buy crypto.
Yeah, exactly, right? Because I would never call myself an expert, because I always think that I don't know everything, and I'm learning things every single day. Like me speaking to you, I resonated very strongly with that bit where you said that you're inquisitive. You like to ask people questions. You like to find out things, right? Same thing with me. So, but what that has maybe the one small negative is the fact that I always find out that I don't know enough when I talk to people, because they're telling me things that I'm like, I probably should have known this, but I don't. And it's great. Like I think, okay, great, my knowledge base is increasing, but at the same time, maybe in the back of my head, I'm thinking, why didn't I know that, right? So I can't call myself an expert in anything. But so it's interesting because that's the first thing that struck me when I was going through your website and doing a little bit of research and went through everything was you didn't call yourself an expert. Everybody else called you an expert. And I think that's kind of the only thing that I would look at in order to understand that this person is an expert. But I mean, we'll see. We'll see over time kind of how the concept of the term expert kind of changes. Because I'm starting to see that a little bit more. Do you remember Clubhouse? And it
Yo,
came
yes, I
out.
do.
It was the hottest thing in the world. Were you really active on Clubhouse?
I listened to a few of them, but after a while, things just went off.
Yeah, because people were within a month of it coming out, people were Clubhouse experts, Clubhouse moderators, admin of like Asia's like second largest Clubhouse group. And I was looking at it and I sat in for one Clubhouse and I'm like, this is the worst version of podcast where everybody shouts and no one listens. I'm like, what's the use? I never liked it, and it kind of like turned me off concepts like expert and everything because you can't call yourself a Clubhouse expert if you've been doing it for one month. Yeah, no. With that, sorry, I go off on a tangent because every time I remember Clubhouse, I remember how much I hated it. It's dead now. So, Adrian, do you have anything else that you kind of want to? Anything else you want to share? Anything else that's coming up for you?
I think one of the key things that perhaps I'd like to also discuss about would be maybe how I've seen marketing has evolved over this period of time. And I'm not going to go through a long spiel or lecture on the theories behind it, but one of the key thing going back to the second part of this conversation about this fractional CMO, when I first started, honestly, it was on a whim because I resigned from my previous job after an argument with my boss, and so it was very impulsive. And then next day I'm like, oh shit, what now? So I had some thought process, go back to private sector, get out of the industry altogether, or to start my own thing. And in starting my own thing, having run a business before, and you probably would be able to relate, managing people is the least fun part of running a
Oh,
business.
for sure.
And I've
I
been
hope
through
my thing
some
doesn't end.
and I've been through some really tough period in my first business where, tomorrow is payday and today no money in the bank. I don't want to go through that again, lah. The making out of excuses and all is just so painful, so annoying. So I decided to go independent now. And initially I was like, I wasn't really sure if this will work out. I don't honestly, when I first started, I don't even know there is such a term called fractional CMO. If I actually only made that adjustment because people realized what I was doing and they kept mentioning the term fractional CMO. Then I go and Google, what is fractional CMO? Oh, it sounds more sophisticated, sound more high atas. Okay, I changed to fractional CMO. So going back to the story, I was telling myself, okay, I do for 6 months and then see how. Because my wife was also nagging at me to find a full-time job and stop toying around. So I put out an SOS and said, hey, I'm doing my own thing. If there's anything I can help you with, let me know. And together with my 2 teaching assignments back then, I have another 3 retainer. So all in 5 different assignments, which helped me do really well. But of course, as you know, with all assignments, it come and go lah. So sometimes it may make one quite jittery and nervous about all this. But one thing I also realized then is actually I don't really have to worry much because of the things that I can bring to the table. And I would explain to you what I mean. Because if you talk about marketing, and I think marketing is a role where it is very easy to apply whatever work onto yourself. And given that most marketing role is really a white collar role, I would imagine the marketing application will be on, say, your LinkedIn. So you cannot tell people that, oh, I am a solid head of social media. When I go to your LinkedIn, only 2 connections, no banner, no headshot. It is like the chicken rice uncle sell you chicken rice, but he don't eat his own chicken rice.
Fair enough. That's a really
Yeah.
good
So
local enough.
so I always use that as as a yardstick, and that also helped me. And along the way, because some of my clients, especially ex-clients, they also have their own marketing people. Then I look at their profile. Okay, LinkedIn not very impressive. Never mind. Then when you talk to them, you hear how they do things. You realize, hey, actually, you should not be head of marketing. You are literally just head of marketing project management. So everything they do is just, PR, we find a PR agency. Or social media, we find a social media agency. Or creative, we find a creative agency. We need to do a webinar, we find an events company. So they are just managing project. And and then I look at myself, actually, across all this, I mean, project management, anyone can do. Obviously, I can do the same thing. But if you need me to roll up my sleeve and hands on, I can do all that as well. I can plan out a social media calendar. I can write content. I've done it before. You need someone to host a podcast, host a video, also can. Moderate an event, also can. Appear on TV, also can. So I think many marketeer, especially the one from the older generation, really have to catch up on the execution aspect, especially on the performance marketing aspect. You don't really have to practice and execute and kick away all your vendor lah. But at the very least, you need to have that skill set. In case your vendor try to pull a fast one or play you out, at least you can be the plan B. And also, I think that there's this term right now, they call it the T-shaped marketeer. So you are a generalist, but then you're good in one thing, and you try to expand that T aspect as much as you can. I don't expect every marketeer to be like me or go and write a bunch of content, go into podcasts, do YouTube, do this, do that. But again, you should be familiar with it, lor. You should at least go through the mechanics of it. You don't have to publish a YouTube episode, but go through the mechanics of it. So you know, my company will do a webinar. Instinctively, you know, okay, we cannot do in this room. Hard walls will cause reverb. We cannot do over there because no lighting. We need to get spotlight, etc., etc. And that, I think, is how one can really play up that value to the organization, especially when one is in a corporate function role, which often most people will associate as a cost center.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. There's a lack of executional knowledge for a lot of things, especially when it comes to I'm certain industries and certain, I would say, generations. It just becomes a fact that you're more people manager, which there is a skill to that. It's just that I think now, especially when you're looking at fast growth and people that are looking to scale up really quickly, you don't need that as much. You need someone who understands enough. So even if they're hiring an agency, they can tell you the agency is doing bullshit, which is really, really difficult for a lot of people. I have to, like when we do work with clients, we have to tell them how to track us. This is what you should be looking at. You shouldn't be counting this. This is rubbish. We can hit that easily. Count this, and then let's see whether we can hit this. This is the hard one, right? And it's more impactful for you. So it's an interesting thing. I mean, I agree with a ton of your points. I thought, and it's very interesting how you kind of fell into a fractional CMO role because you didn't know that existed as well. To be fair, I heard the term, I didn't know what it was before you actually mentioned it to me. So that's really cool. I'm cognizant of your time, so I won't take up any more of it. But we'll be sharing this with our audience soon, and then I'll also kind of put in your website. I'll share kind of the work that you do and the rest of the stuff. Anything else that you want me to include? Anything else that you want to shout out to our audience?
No, I'm good. But for people who's keen to learn more about me and what I do, they can find me on LinkedIn. Should be quite easy to find me. And of course, they can go to my website, adriantan.com.sg to get the rest.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Adrian. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.